And so therefore, on the same day that he communes Roger Stone, he puts his former attorney back in prison. Today, it was nice to know that the judge said that the attorney was put in out of retaliation. And so Cohen's going to be able to get out. But that just shows you, if you are a part of his friendships, he will then move forward to cover you. The other night, he wished the former girlfriend of Epstein, I wish her well, okay, and we know what she's been accused for. So he wishes these people well. And at the same time, if you're going to share things, then he takes you to court, puts you back in, and even tries to keep his own niece from being able to publish her own book about what's going on in the family. And so this is revealing to you what's going on. If you're not in this corner, then you better get ready for an attack. And as people start seeing that with a little over 100 days to the election, it's really starting to see what he's been made of. And the presidency, like former First Lady Michelle Obama said, it reveals who you are. Right. And this is revealing who he has been. And some people who may have said, well, this is media, it's revealing him.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you had mentioned that stood out to me as well was the kind of treatment or the backlash that his niece has received. We know that his niece, Mary Trump, recently wrote a book entitled Too Much and Never Enough. This book was met with a lot of resistance in the family. They did not want this book to be published. There was a huge controversy surrounding that. And when I was watching the reaction from this book, I couldn't help but think of his former national security advisor, John Bolton's book. And the kind of reaction. And the thing is, like, with John Bolton, you have to think, John Bolton, to me, was itching he was itching to share the information he had about President Trump. He was teasing the press during the impeachment proceedings. Mm-hmm. He was giving a little information here and there about information that he knew was potentially damaging to the impeachment trial in terms of Trump's defense. And so for me, Mary Trump had less to gain than John Bolton did. Mary Trump is already coming from a place where she has basically outcast from the family.
That's correct.
She's not close with anyone in the family. And in interviews that she has undergone in the past few days, she admitted that the only one that she really got a close connection with was Donald Trump's sister, the former judge. So I think it's very interesting to look at the motives that are surrounding these individuals. Camille, I'm interested to get your thoughts on the kinds of potential political backlash that may result from the Roger Stone commutation, or the commutation of Roger Stone's sentence, or whether or not you think there would be no backlash. Would this not be a factor? Would this just be another one of the many controversies that come in one cable news cycle and leave the next?
Yeah, I would love to say that it would have an effect on people's perspective when it comes to the election in about 103 days. I would love for that to actually become something that people talk about, but unfortunately, I think it's part of the fray. I think it's a part of the cacophony of things that have been happening around this administration, not only in the last couple of months, but there has been scandal after scandal after scandal. So I'm not sure that this particular moment will speak volumes to what, will really, in a way, affect, I think, what Trump's ultimate message is, which is literally the same slogan and campaign tactics of the last election. He's not really changing up anything. There's not really a new message that we see coming out of his administration or his campaign team. He let go of his campaign manager and has renewed some staff there on that side. But ultimately, I think that he's playing the game, unfortunately, that I don't think has a lot of rules for him. This is an impeached president that we're talking about as well. I would love for that to be a part of people's kind of decision process when it comes to the next couple of months. But unfortunately, again, I think it's just a piece of many things that are swirling around in the universe. And I think it almost, in a terrible way, I think it almost plays to his advantage when it comes to his base, as accusation after accusation comes from the left, or from the House. It just kind of looks like he can't be beat. There's nothing that can kind of touch him. We kind of touched on Mrs. Maxwell and her trial. I think that's something that, people who are dialed in will kind of be focused on to see, what will come out of the Epstein debacle and whatever Ms. Maxwell has to say on the matter as well. Is that changing QAnon's perspective? Is that changing, people who really support the administration or who really support his cabinet and what they're about? I don't necessarily think so. I think that one thing we probably could place our hope in is Biden's VP pick. I think that right there on the other side is something that could really get folks excited and a little more dialed into what's going to happen in November. So I think, unfortunately, we love for these little scandals or, these really terrible things to play out and have some sort of consequence. But I think that as we look at the conventions coming up, that might give us a little more hope.
Right. And I like what you had mentioned about, looking at the fact that since this presidency began on January 2017, there has seemed to be an ongoing some kind of
that way.
Like run after that, and it makes you wonder: have we become numb to the kind of political scandals that have surrounded the administration? Will this really affect the electoral outcomes? But another thing that you had mentioned was that there may be some kind of that there may be more meaningful response from the electorate based on former Vice President Biden's potential vice presidential nominee. I just want to go ahead and pause because I see David with me. I'm going to go ahead and introduce him. So, folks, David, very distinguished guest, and I'm so thankful that he's joining us. David Opangwade, thank you so much, man. David Opangwade is from Washington, D.C. He is a class of 2012 alumnus of Grinnell College in Iowa and currently a third-year student at Howard University School of Law, where I'm also attending. While attending Grinnell, David studied abroad at the University of Cape Town with a focus on electoral politics, specifically the development of the post-apartheid African National Congress. David graduated with a BA in political science with a concentration in American studies. David began his political career as an intern in the DC office of former U.S. Senator Tom Harkin of Iowa, before eventually serving as a legislative intern in the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. Upon graduating, David took his first job as a field organizer with the Delaware Democrats. Shortly thereafter, he joined President Barack Obama's re-election campaign in 2012 in Iowa, assisting a successful push for the president's second term. Upon returning to D.C. after the election, David joined the office of U.S. Congressman Alcee L. Hastings of Florida as a staff assistant and quickly rose to the position of legislative assistant. Following a stint on the Hill, David returned to electoral politics as Southern Regional Director for former Governor Martin O'Malley, his campaign for president in 2016. Afterwards, David worked for a statewide political action campaign in Florida. David delivered a TED Talk focused on community building before returning to D.C. and founding Forward Progress, LLC. David has since worked with several campaigns in the D.C. and Maryland area, ranging from mayoral and city council to congressional races. David, it's such an honor to have you. And while I'm at it, this discussion is getting so good, but I'm going to go ahead and reintroduce my other guest. There was a little
Appreciate you, Mike. First and foremost, and esteemed other people that are joining this call this evening. I appreciate that we're having these discussions, and like Dr. Davis mentioned, with just over 100 days before this election coming up, there's a lot of stuff that's going on in all of our heads. And Camille, I agree with you 100%. we sort of have removed our, integrity in terms of our politics. Just merely electing TV personality has kind of removed any sense of responsibility in terms of the electorate. And so, I couldn't be any happier than to be in this space talking with you all right now.
David, it's an honor to have you, man. I'm going to reintroduce my other guests because I think there were some technical difficulties. But Dr. Davis, again, Dr. Davis, such an honor to have you. Dr. Oliver Davis served 12 years, 3 consecutive terms on the South Bend Common City Council after first being elected in 2007. Councilman Dr. Oliver Davis worked hard to represent the people of South Bend, Indiana, and to speak out on the issues which helped to empower the lives of the people of South Bend. On November 22nd, 2019, he endorsed Vice President Joe Biden for president for the 2020 presidential election and was a spokesperson for the Biden team. And Davis announced on January 29th, 2020 this year that he will challenge incumbent Dave Thomas for the St. Joseph County Commissioner District 2 seat in the 2020 primary election. On June 2nd of this year, 2020, Dr. Oliver Davis was blessed to defeat Dave Thomas, and he won the St. Joseph County Commissioner District 2 Democrat primary. And he will face the Republican challenger in the general election this November 3rd, 2020. He has professional roots that are grounded in social work, and which he believes uniquely empowers him in advocating and speaking up for positive change in the lives of individuals, families, groups, and communities. Dr. Davis served as an adjunct professor in the social work and gerontology program at St. Mary's College in Notre Dame, Indiana, and as an adjunct faculty member in the Bachelor of Arts social work program at Brandman University in Irvine, California. He earned a doctorate of social work degree from the University of Southern California, School of Social Work in Los Angeles, California. He completed the professional certificate in management from the University of Notre Dame, Mendoza College of Business, and the professional certificate in political social work from the University of Michigan. It is such an honor to have you, sir, with us tonight. Next, again, Camille Moore is a graduate of Oakland University and a CMU Hines College Public Policy School. She is a recent graduate. She is a recent CBCF Energy Fellow and the current 2020 Fellow with the Business Council for Sustainable Energy, where she is focusing on legislation that will diversify the clean workforce of the future. Her interests and experiences include foreign affairs, energy, environment, and minority serving institutions. And lastly, Mr. Jerry Ford. Jerry Ford is a former candidate for the Texas House of Representatives, a journalist, activist, and radio host on KJOZ 880 AM, KCOH 1230, and KTSU 90.9 FM. He is also known for his involvement with the Black Lives Matter movement surrounding Sandra Bland in 2015, and has made television appearances as a commentator on Fox 26 local news in Houston, Texas. Jerry received a Master's of Public Policy from the Hobby School of Public Affairs at the University of Houston and is currently a rising 3L at Howard University School of Law. Jerry, it's such an honor to have you, man. So let's go ahead and continue where we left off. Camille had mentioned the fact that there's ongoing controversies. So this Roger Stone debacle in terms of commuting his sentence may not come into, it may not have a large political price attached to it. But Jerry, I want to get your thoughts, man, in terms of how you see the commuting of Roger Stone's sentence actually playing a role. And if you could, because I was also curious about this, because I was thinking about it, when you have a year, especially in this time in history, when there's such focus going into the injustices of not only police brutality, but the criminal justice system itself, people feel as if folks primarily in the African-American community, people of color, are not receiving basically a fair treatment with the legal system. And then you have on the flip side, a case in point with Mr. Stone having his sentence commuted significantly for a crime that if someone with less prominence, probably of a different skin tone, committed, would be facing significant years in prison. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I got to tell you, Mike, Dr. Davis touched on it earlier when he talked about Michelle Obama and the comment that she made about how the presidency reveals yourself. I mean, the truth of the matter is, none of this is really revealing because everybody already knows who Donald Trump is. But this also does reveal, to answer direct your question, this reveals who America is and who America has been. Black people has always been treated differently in this country when it comes to the criminal justice system. And it's nothing different here in 2020. But I think when you look at Roger Stone and Donald Trump, basically, he rewards people who who's loyal to him. You look back at his 2016 campaign. You look at his campaign manager, his deputy campaign manager, his personal attorney. I mean, they're all in jail, right? So this got to be one of the most corrupt administrations in recent history. But the really the sad part about it is that I think right now in America, people are already in their corners, right? So if you're a Trump supporter already, you don't care about this, and if you hate Trump, you just hate him even more now. So I don't think this is going to change anybody, because I think most people's minds are already made up. Like it was a football coach who had a quote, like he said, like, we know they were who we thought they were. Like Donald Trump is who we thought he was during the 2016 campaign. He's been very clear about it, very upfront about it. He's not competent. He's not serious about anything that he does. Everything's about him. But hopefully there's enough people who consider themselves on the fence, who will look at this and say, you know what, I don't think this is a person who should be handling a pandemic and the serious issues that we're facing. They just announced that John Kasich is going to be speaking at the DNC, and I quite frankly, I think that he might have more influence over that group of people. I think Pete, during the campaign, used to call them the future former Republicans. I think John Kasich might have influence over those people. So we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, and I like what you had mentioned in terms of the kind of treatment or the kind of culture that's kind of developed or that's evident from the outside for people watching from the outside looking in, at the kind of way that Trump rewards campaign managers. And I was thinking back as you were speaking on I think Trump went through 3 campaign managers in 2016. He went through Paul Manafort, and then there was the other gentleman. I can't remember.
It was the guy before him.
Right. He was indicted. And then there was Kellyanne Conway that came in towards the last leg. David, for someone like you who's been involved, you were involved not just in the 2016 election, but in the 2012 election. So you were basically on the ground working, not just looking at the news or paying attention to current events, but you were actually involved. You remember the 2016 election and the culture that kind of developed there. There was a strong desire to break away from political insiders, and that kind of coined the term or led to the term "drain the swamp." Do you think that folks who may have went ahead and were sold on a Trump presidency because they were tired of political corruption, because they were tired of political insiders, do you think that they may break away or may feel as if they were betrayed, so to speak, because of things like the commutation of Roger Stone's sentence? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Great question, Mike. So I think that number one, the issues that were being pushed in 2016 were twofold. One, were coming from the Democratic side. People thought that the Clinton campaign was triangulating and pushing out other candidates from their, fair opportunities initially during the primary season, right? And so there were a good number of Democrats that, through their disgust, whether being Bernie supporters or O'Malley supporters or whoever they were supporting outside of Hillary, they decided that they were going to kind of become these phantom Trump supporters. And I know everyone here has seen kind of that term coming up as well. But I think that the sheer like sense of being invincible as a powerful, rich white man who is now being president. Anyone who kind of postures themselves to kind of, you know, conspire to do things that we would normally see to be tampering with the electoral process or illegal in nature in general, they've kind of got the sense that they have this overwhelming immunity, almost like a God-given immunity, if they tie themselves to Donald Trump's, you know, complete disregard for the Constitution, in terms of the emoluments clause, in terms of a number of, I mean, we can literally go down, you know, the list of different violations that any other president, and Barack Obama in particular, would have never been able to, you know, kind of traverse the presidency through with this, you know, reckless disregard for the impact on the society at large. And so everyone who's kind of, you know, positioned themselves right now is more so thinking about, okay, forget the politics. Where is my money going? How am I going to be able to benefit from the tax structure as it is right now under not only Republican control, but Trump control? And see if he's able to manipulate a situation to where he can make money while being the president, then all of his cronies are certainly looking at opportunities to do 2-3 times as much as him. And so it really becomes a situation about access and education in terms of how you can structure your financial background. That's how people are voting. You know, as a Democrat, as a lifelong supporter of the Democratic movement, and now somewhat leaning more towards a progressive movement in general, it becomes, you know, harder and harder to just take retail politics to be, you know, representative of what a presidency is going to look like. You know, there are plenty of conversations you and I have had about the shortcomings of President Obama in terms of, you know, some of his policies that he could have pushed more on for Black people in general. And that's why you have individuals like Kanye West who are literally triangulating the situation right now. He has no business getting involved saying that he's going to run for president. But what he's able to do is he's able to pull some of these phantom voters away who aren't necessarily in the same financial situation as those who might have moved in the 2016 cycle, but Biden were to be elected. And so it's just one big, you know, kind of flash in the pan that's going on. And then you've got all of these voters that are really just thinking about their financial interests.
And I like the fact that you highlighted that voters are really looking at their vested self-interest when they're looking at when they're considering potential corruption or something, you know, underhandedness. As you were speaking, I was also thinking of President Trump's replacement of the prosecutor in the Southern District of New York, and we know that jurisdiction of New York is investigating his tax returns. So things add to this cloud that exists. But moving on, you touched on it a little bit, Jerry, in terms of, you know, there being more of a shift with that middle of the lane vote, and it was kind of evident with former governor of Ohio, John Kasich, and the fact that he's speaking at the DNC, which, you know, 4 years ago that would have been if you would have told me that 4 years later John Kasich is speaking at the DNC, I would have told you you're lying. But Dr. David, I was hoping that I would get some more insight from you in terms of your thoughts on, you know, the RNC and DNC approaches, because I believe a spokesperson from the RNC recently told a CNN reporter that the Republican National Committee is not making any changes to their platform since 2016. Do you think that would cost them in the long run? Do you think that Republicans should have added more to the platform in light of the past 4 years? Or do you think that not changing the platform would have no real electoral consequences?
Well, I think this, Mr. Taylor, in 2016, when they last had their platform, we didn't even think about the word coronavirus, that whole thing. Now that has dominated everything else. today the president has had to cancel the whole RNC part was going to go on in Jacksonville. Mm-hmm. And that has been tabled because of the fact that as you see the numbers going up, in 14 days, we can be at another million. It's decreasing of how many people are being affected by that. And you add to that the fact that people are now being forced to go back to school or may not go back to school, online education. That's where their mindsets. My child going to go back to school, will carry a disease back and forth. That's a mindset. But grandpa died because my kid goes back to school. That has changed the landscape of everything else. Mm-hmm. It not only changed the landscape of how people have viewed President Trump. In 2016, you had coming into the Democratic convention the battle between Senator the Sanders camp and then Clinton's camp. We haven't had that this year. Mm-hmm. And it looked like that was going to happen. But then when everything came to a standstill after South Carolina and then Alabama in the early primaries, everything started coalescing around Vice President Biden so quickly. And then you add in the corona situation and the economy being shut down, that the friction that was here in 2016 is not here now. And right. So therefore, it has allowed Vice President Biden to include more people from the Sanders camp to give him a more progressive agenda that he normally would not have had if we had not had the coronavirus, in my personal opinion. He had that middle of the road issue that was causing some of the Sanders people to not want to support him. And now he can move to more of a progressive agenda, where it's in terms of infrastructure, the speech he made a few days ago, his economy, and everything else can have that more left-wing kind of approach, because the nation is there after the issue of seeing George Floyd saying, "I cannot breathe." And what George Floyd, he could not breathe, but he brought breath into this nation in a way that it has not been seen. And with Black Lives Matter, everybody matters. And that fairness issue is come to a whole level of importance. And to top it off, when you have Congressman Lewis dying in the same time, it really brought back where Black Lives Matter and all these other movements, how important they were back then. It tied it all together. And it put us on a left wing, in a sense, a left side more so than on the right side, which is benefiting the Democrats and is really affecting the Republicans, so much so that the Lincoln Project is attacking their own side and making these videos that are awesome videos from the Republican side against Trump, which didn't happen in 2016. So Trump is being attacked by Democrats commercials as well as Republican commercials. And so therefore, John Kasich is looking great.
Yeah,
coming to the DNC.
You had just dropped so much in just a few minutes, but one of the things that you had highlighted was that there was, and we talked about it in the last show last week, there was this time that Biden had to frame his general election message that Hillary Clinton didn't have, because if you remember in 2016, Bernie Sanders waited all the way until June. He fought all the way till the end before he dropped out of that before he dropped out the primary. But in this election, there's more of this emergency mindset where, after South Carolina and after the domino effect that happened after there, you start to see. I remember how shocked I was, and this was March, and Buttigieg drops out, Klobuchar drops out, and it was like one after the other. They each knew that if they stayed in the race longer, they risked jeopardizing not just Biden but their chances, right? And you also mentioned the Lincoln Project, which I think it's the Lincoln Project. To be honest with you, I think the ads that they're putting out are hitting it more on the head than the Biden ads. When you actually look at I remember they put out an ad called "Morning in America," and for those who are watching, if you haven't seen it, please watch this ad. It took the 1984 re-election theme for President Ronald Reagan. Morning in America, which was emphasizing how great things were. Because if you remember, Reagan's phrase in the 1980 debate against Carter was, "Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?" So he was re-emphasizing that you're better off. But this Lincoln Project turned that argument on its head by saying, with the Reagan words in the background, it was an ironic ad, because you're seeing all of the turmoil of 2020. You're seeing the fact that there's been a denial that this virus would get out of hand, that this thing would magically go away by April. You're seeing the protests and the kind of attacks that they're receiving by state and federal officials, and you just had to. It made you look at contradicting messages as they were. And Camille, if you can just jump in, and I wanted to get your thoughts on. I wanted to get your thoughts on the way that this coronavirus pandemic may allow or may not allow the Democratic Party to look more responsible. I know they're doing more of a virtual approach to the convention. The Republicans left my home state, North Carolina. They've decided to go to Florida, but I believe they're conducting the business portion of the convention in Charlottesville. But I know, and just looking at local news and looking at comments on the local news web's social media pages, there's a lot of backlash against my governor, Governor Roy Cooper, because they believe that he should have had the convention here. But on a national scale, do you think, Camille, that would sell? Do you think that in the long run, just looking at Trump's just recent campaign rally attempts and how disappointing the turnout was, do you think that this would actually backlash against the GOP?
I have to say that I am not sure. I think that we look for these logical setups. We look at look at the facts, we look at someone's track record, and we say, man, this might be the time that this person comes out, with blood on their hands. They cannot come out of this situation unscathed. Mm-hmm. We saw this administration put on a full event, unsocially distanced at Mount Rushmore, in a community that actively asked for it not to happen. Mm-hmm. There's, with coronavirus, I think a lot of people were talking about it being an equalizer, it being, something that'll really, help kind of show the ugliest parts of what's not working, healthcare, unemployment, just kind of a lot of different things. And I think, I'm never one of these people who wants to look at the coronavirus and say, oh, well, there are positives, mm-hmm. I'm definitely not in that camp. However, I do think that one of the largest selling points of this administration to show that the economy has done really well is the unemployment rate, especially in the Black community, especially in the Latinx community. That is a major point. Unemployment has been the lowest it has ever been in the history of the United States. Even back in 2019, those numbers on their face were true. But when it came to job quality, and when it came to kind of these questions of gig economy, how many jobs are you having to work to make ends meet? What are the benefits of these jobs? What does retirement look like? Kind of all those questions were not being looked at. Mm-hmm. There is an unemployment rate in the United States that is nearing 15%. And this is not because of some sort of economic crash. This is literally due to a self-imposed restriction that we are having to put in place to save people's lives. So it is a different setup. It's a different set of cards. And I think that what I've seen and what I'm hopeful for because of my issue area is that we will focus on creating quality jobs, that we will really start to look at retirement, and we'll start to kind of look at these pieces to build back better, to build back the nation that we want to see. As far as the RNC and DNC are concerned, when it comes to people being engaged, I've had this discussion a lot with a really good friend of mine who's also a social worker, Dr. Davis. She is a political powerhouse. And one thing that she said to me that kind of made me think kind of a lot about our setup right now is that people want to feel comfortable again. Yep. People want the newsreel to stop. People want to get back to their lives. This idea that all of these things that are happening are going to somehow push people to become more active. Maybe some people will register. Maybe some people will hopefully turn out is fantastic. with mail-ins, despite the administration's, repeated efforts to discourage mail-in ballots. Ultimately, I think that people are looking for security.
Mhm.
People are looking for protection. And I think one thing that someone else kind of pointed to is that, well, I'll just end it by saying that I think that people are going to be voting with their economic interests, which I think David was talking about. People are going to be voting based off of the best way that they can protect their families. And I think that coronavirus aside, that is kind of the platform that both chambers, as well as the executive and these campaigns, need to kind of be focused on. So,
yeah, and I like what you had mentioned in terms of, the fact that people can vote with their economic interests in mind. And we're looking at, and you mentioned the unemployment rates. I remember having a conversation with folks in the barbershop, and there were two African-American older men, and they had Make America Great Again hats on. And they were arguing that unemployment has been the best it's ever been in a long time. And that they were getting jobs. And when I had challenged them and brought the point that you had just raised, Camille, in terms of the quality of the jobs that many minorities are getting, they didn't really have a solid answer. And then when we're looking at the disproportionate effect that the pandemic has had on people of color in terms of layoffs, when we're looking at the kinds of employment, the kinds of jobs that require people to be laid off. It's primarily people who are in customer service positions, retail positions, transit positions, public transportation.
hospitality. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And a lot of these people, most of these people are people of color. Jerry, I want to get your thoughts, knowing that, conventions have become wide-scale commercials for campaigns, looking at how the nature of the convention has changed drastically. I don't think we really had a contested convention, even though it's been raised since, I believe, 90. Was it 92? I don't even think it was 92, even though Pat Buchanan challenged Bush. I think the last time we had a contested convention was 1976 with Reagan and Ford, or 1980 with Ted Kennedy and Jimmy Carter. But the bottom line has been years. So these have traditionally been just big campaign opportunities. But in light of this pandemic and the nature that these conventions are taking, do you see any political benefit for the Democrats for doing a virtual convention? We've never seen something like this before. I personally don't know how this is going to play out. Do you see any kind of potential gain by taking the, responsible route and not having delegates come out and meet in large groups to avoid anyone contacting the virus?
Yeah, well, so I think it's going to be a big gain for the Democrats. One, because of what you just said, that it's the responsible thing to do. But I think when you look back at 2016, I think the convention really hurted Hillary Clinton. I mean, John Lewis just passed this past week, and unfortunately, it's hard to really play his last speech at the DNC because he was being booed. Right? It was protests, and it was so hectic. And I feel like that, if a lot of this stuff didn't happen this year, it could have been a contested convention. It could have been a lot of protests. It could have been a lot of things going on. And I think when people are looking now at their government, we can have these philosophical debates about limited government, about, how big the government should be or how small. But at the end of the day, what people really want is just a competent government that can protect them from viruses like this, who can advance our interests overseas, advance our interests domestically. And I think people are trying to see, like, who's competent, right? That's really a sad thing to do, but like, who's competent enough to run the government? Like when I look at Trump and Joe Biden, who do I trust with the Article 2 powers? So I think that the Democrats have an ability now, because of the candidate they have, to really protect him from, I think, you know, he could have been exposed in a way, you know, because of the type of candidate he is. But I think it's a way to really protect him and put him into the best light possible. And I think the Democrats are going to benefit from this. But I think one thing that a lot of Democrats are not talking about is, you know, 4 years ago when Hillary lost, she underperformed in Milwaukee, Detroit, and Philadelphia, and that's one of the reasons why, you know, she lost Wisconsin, Michigan. And everybody said, well, you know, what's the reason for it? She didn't show up. One of the reasons for it was that she was the first Democratic nominee since 1964 to not have the full backing of the Voter Rights Act. Right. And you know, we haven't been able to really address that. And there's been conversations about, you know, having a new Voters' Rights Act and put in the name of John Lewis. I think Democrats really need to be prepared because, you know, down here in Texas with a lot of voter ID laws, there's been a big push to really disenfranchise African American voters. And I think it's going to be reflected in this election too, you know. But I really think that, you know, this virtual convention, I think it gives the Democrats the opportunity to really put Joe Biden in the best light, and really, you know, really help him when it comes to, you know, the decision that a lot of people are trying to make, you know, this November.
Right. And just for those who may not know about, you know, the gutting of the Voting Rights Act, I know Jerry, David, and I, we're law students, and Camille, you and I have had classes back at our undergrad at Oakwood. And Dr. Davis, I know you familiar. But for those who are not familiar, Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act was removed. Section 5 required that states that had a history of voter discrimination must submit any changes to their statewide voting laws to the Attorney General's office. Once that was removed, there was no there was no kind of requirement for those states to check in with the Attorney General or any other authority, federal authority, before they go ahead and enact these laws, which has seen a rise in voter ID laws. We know that mostly minority Americans are less likely to have government ID on them. It's resulted in all kinds of different gerrymandering actions by the state and local governments and municipalities. And we've seen it, you know, I think it's really evident in just case in point, 2018 midterms in Georgia. Look at the effect that it had on the Georgia election, and we see the effect that it has had against the candidacy of Stacey Abrams for governor. And so this is a big deal. This is a big deal, folks, and so we should be paying attention to it. But one of the things that you had mentioned, Jerry and Camille, was this desire for return to normalcy. And I think usually in challenger years, when there's a challenger against the incumbent president, the ones that are successful seem to be the young campaign, the campaign that's offering a tidal change, a campaign that's offering a new direction. We saw it with Nixon and Ford. There was a weariness in the country over Watergate. Jimmy Carter promises, and he'll never tell a lie to the American people. Very refreshing. We see that Bill Clinton's challenge to George H.W. Bush's incumbency, of course, he was offering a new generation. He was the first baby boomer to be a major nominee for president. And despite the controversies that seemed to surround him in 1992, he went on to win because there was just a vibrant feel for his candidacy. And so usually when the Democrats put out a fresh face, they seem to be successful in terms of incumbent elections. But what's interesting about this election is that there's so much controversy, so much weariness, so much weariness over the multitude of crises that we're facing, the health crisis with COVID-19, the racial unrest that's going on with police brutality, and one incident seems to follow the heels of another. And all of these different controversies seem to make people want to miss the old days. So the excitement seems to be in going back to the way things were. And David, I was hoping to get your thoughts on this because I know that the Biden campaign and the Sanders campaign came together. They made proposals for the DNC, and I think among the proposals was, student loan forgiveness and things that were attractive to the younger electorate. Now, of course, the younger electorate doesn't have a great tracking record in terms of voter turnout as much as the older electorate. But do you think that the desire to return to normalcy, coupled with the unity between the Sanders and the Biden campaigns, do you think that that would unify or be effective in unifying the Democratic Party, making it a stronger party going forward in the general election season?
First of all, I think it's great that you've made the connection between the two parties, even beyond, I mean, not the two parties, but the two candidates, even beyond just kind of what's been going on of late. Simone Sanders was the national press secretary for Sanders last cycle, and so she and Kamaya Marshall and a number of other young Black professionals who've been working in policy and political spaces for the last half decade plus, they very quickly recognized that they had to make a gamble to bring some life to Biden's campaign in terms of his outreach to Black people. Now, have there been some missteps by the candidate in terms of his language of, if you don't vote for me, you're not Black, and things like that? Yes, those gaffes have occurred, but it's not because the resources haven't been there in terms of the guidance. And so that's what the biggest issue is. And that's where, more than just what he presents in terms of, a policy agenda or promises to the people at large, who he selects as his vice president will speak volumes, and who he puts in his cabinet in terms of a bench, because the Democratic Party has woefully neglected the creation of a consistent bench. And because of that, you have these completely random, subsectors of our party that are, coming to the forefront during presidential cycles, or even trying to win certain congressional races. But at the end of the day, there's no unified voice. There's no kind of image of who the Democratic Party should be. I mean, it's so vital that he has Barack Obama coming out now and kind of campaigning for him. But to be honest with you, I'm really afraid that, the efforts are happening a little bit too late, particularly considering that we have a pandemic going on. So you can, spit out whatever promises that you want to, but if I'm looking at it as the least informed voter possible, who am I kind of, gazing at in terms of the way that they carry themselves? So much of what will be determined by the average voter, as opposed to the kind of financially driven voter, will be the posturing of who he has coming out of the convention. And so the convention will actually be extremely important in terms of that, if not anything else. It's just, how is this campaign going to posture itself on a national level, considering that this man is approaching his 80s and the level of gaffes that he has, even with, such an intimate, but appropriate number of Black people who are high-level staffers, kind of giving him guidance on a day in and out situation. It's really mind-boggling,
Dr. Davis, I'm curious, because I know that you actually came out early in support of former Vice President Biden. You were on Politics Nation with Al Sharpton discussing this and your support of him over South Bend, Indiana, former mayor of South Bend, Indiana, Pete Buttigieg, former mayor of your own city. What is your response to the critiques or criticism from those on the right and the left who come out against Biden, saying he may not show himself to be competent enough for the job? He may show himself to make a lot of gaffes on this job. And so that, coupled with his, his age, but even though in fairness, he's just about 2 or 3 years older than the current president, two guys in their 70s. What is your response to those criticisms? Why is Biden still the Democratic president?
Well, thank you for that question. Senator Sanders is even older than he was the oldest one. I think things that you have to look at, and I think even it helps Sanders. This gray hair now that I had to get used to having. I'm an Oakwoodite too, class of '91. Here I am getting gray hair. But one thing about gray hair that I've learned, when you're in a crisis, and this is what I shared back then, you don't really, with all due respect to those who are starting out, you don't want somebody to get on United Airlines and it's stormy outside and you see all these clouds, you taking off in the rain and the wind. You don't really want somebody to tell you that this is their first time flying the plane. You don't want to hear that. You don't want to hear that this is their first time. I was coming in from Cincinnati on a transportation trip, and the lady came over on our plane, the pilot. She said, "Hey, I've checked every different frequency. We're going to have a bumpy ride into South Bend. I know how to handle this. Thank you for flying with us. We'll be landing in South Bend shortly. Enjoy your ride." And it was a bumpy ride all the way in. Okay, but she had been there. She had been through the storm. And anybody to have been through the storm when you're in the storm. We are in a storm right now in the United States. And one thing Camille had talked about with the social work friend I talked to her, we're not voting our pocketbooks this year. We are voting our emotional souls. So Vice President Biden was right to say this is the soul of America. We are. When you heard "I Can't Breathe," all of a sudden Black Lives Matter, that was last year was a renegade group, is now a everyday stream group. Come on, Black Lives Matter, welcome to the group. Really? That was in 2019. They were not welcome to the group. 2020, they were welcome to the group. So many things have changed this year. Online, everybody knows about Zooming and everybody knows about this, okay? And so this is the change. People are voting because of so much pain this year. Vice President Biden lost his child at a young age. He was a single father taking care of his boys. He lost his other son as an adult. He lost his wife. You want somebody who's been through pain. Mm-hmm. As an older therapist now, people appreciate the fact that I've gone through family challenges. I've seen my mother in her grave. I looked over that and looked at her in her casket. That's a whole different ballgame. So when I give grief counseling and I tell people I've been there, I went to a funeral today, I know what it's like to look at your own parent in a casket. So therefore, I can counsel you in a way now that I couldn't counsel you before. Yeah, I may have a gaffe or two. I'm going to have that. But at the end of the day, you choose me because I know what it's like to see my mama in the grave. I know what it's like to go to Mother's Day and have to cry when I go to the store. When I go back to Oakwood University, you can see the graveyard over there. My mama's out there. My uncle's out there. I know what it's like now. And so therefore, I'm at a different stage in life. Yeah, I'm older. But when you're in a storm and you got to get rid of somebody that's causing the storm, you want somebody who's been in the battle. And that's where I think people saw that. And the fact that he can show empathy. That's coming across clear with Vice President Biden, and it really even helped me and those who've been out there. When people see that empathy in a way that they have not seen, whether you're black or white or Hispanic, they are watching that empathy. And when a person doesn't show it, and another person showing it, they're voting their pocketbook and empathy this year.
Right, and I like the fact that Dr. Davis, you had mentioned that when it comes to Biden, his experience is an asset more than a liability. The fact that he's been in the fight is an asset more than a liability. And it seems to be such a reverse in 2016, where there was such this kind of fervor against whoever was in the arena longest. Now that we're in a storm, as you had pointed out, we're in a storm when it comes down to this coronavirus. We're in a storm when it comes down to COVID-19. When there are storms, usually people want the steady hand at the helm. And that serves the former vice president very well. And I remember, oh, go ahead. Okay.
Well, one thing, the last time an older person like this was elected was in 1964. Mm-hmm. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hello? Last time somebody was elected like this, but in 1964, the country was at a crisis. President Kennedy had been shot. And so therefore, nobody wanted to challenge Vice President Lyndon Johnson because he was the steady hand to get them through that crisis. And so therefore, they supported him because he had gotten them through that crisis over time. There are times when you want an older person when there's that crisis. After President Johnson, everybody else who the Democrats have chosen has been a younger person. Mm-hmm. Everybody else from Carter to Clinton to President Obama, everybody's been younger. But the last time we had an interesting type of crisis was in those early 60s, and they chose an older person.
Yeah. And I like the fact
because he'd already been there when Dallas happened.
Right. And you had mentioned also that there's a certain feeling and empathy that this candidacy gives. And when you look at the other side, when there seems to be no empathy at all.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying this just as a partisan, but just as someone looking at both sides neutrally. Who do you really believe would be able to comfort you in times of grief, in times of sorrow? If you were to trust both, if you were to have Trump in one room and Biden in the same room, who would you go to for comfort? Honestly, with yourself, honest. But you had also highlighted the fact that there was a trend following the 1964 election. And there seemed to be this trend towards going for the young, fresh face. Everyone, following the Kennedy assassination, and after Kennedy was bought into this legacy, he became a legacy kind of figure. There was a huge emphasis on candidates running, or pressure from candidates running, on emphasizing the fact that they're the next Kennedy. I remember famously in 1988, the vice president nominee for the Republican ticket, who's also from Indiana, Dan Quayle, running on the George H.W. candidacy, famously said, "I have the same qualifications that Jack Kennedy had when he was in the Senate," and it was basically a layup opportunity for Lloyd Bentsen, the VP nominee on the Democratic side, saying that, "Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy." Now people seem, to your point, Dr. Davis, people seem to be voting on how they feel. There seems to be less of an emphasis on the age of the person and how does this person make me feel. Case in point, Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump pulled the biggest crowds in 2016. So I remember that, earlier this year during the primary and the caucuses and everything, there was this strong emphasis on, who's the most exciting candidate, who's getting the most young people, who's getting the most enthusiastic voters. And I remember I had some cousins, and I mentioned this in the last show, who went to caucus in Iowa, and they said that the excitement was with the Bernie Sanders folks. And when I came back home and I interned with the district attorney's office here in North Carolina, very Republican town, I remember the folks asked me, why, just picking my brain, why would you go with Biden when you have all these options here? And I said, Biden, to me, I see him as being able to pick off people in the middle of the road more than I see a Bernie Sanders candidacy. But Jerry, I know you're itching to jump in on this, man. Go ahead and jump in.
Well, I want to say something about that because, when the mainstream, I guess, political world, Twitter world talks about excitement, right? Which candidate has the most excitement behind them or energy? The measurement seems always be from the lens of a 28-year-old white guy from the Northeast, right? I measure it by here in Texas, like my aunties, right? Who are my aunties most excited about, right? Who is the base of the party, which is, old African American women? Who are they most excited about? And when this election came, when South Carolina came, when they came down here doing Super Tuesday in Texas, the excitement was behind, like Joe Biden, because African American women has always been excited about, Joe Biden in 2016. It was very excited. It was a lot of energy behind Hillary Clinton. But this narrative is out there that, these candidates has no excitement because a young white liberal from the Northeast isn't excited about them. And, I have a problem with that because, quite frankly, the base of the party is African American women. It is Democrats in the South, in Texas, Alabama, Mississippi, North Carolina. They decide who the nominee is going to be. And, it's always very dismissive of, the conversation has been very dismissive of, Democrats in the South, especially when they hold so much power. So every time I hear that conversation, they say, well, there's no energy behind Joe Biden. Did you talk to any Black person in South Carolina? Right. Did you talk to any person in the Super Tuesday states? Or were you just measuring the excitement in Iowa or New Hampshire? So that's my response to that.
Yeah, and to your point, Jerry, I remember, especially celebrities weighing in and talking heads, like you mentioned, weighing in on what happened after the South Carolina primaries. They make it seem as if Congressman Clyburn came in, saved the day, and because he said he's voting for Biden, everyone followed Clyburn. But I refute that because Biden had a long relationship with the state of South Carolina. His family constantly made trips to South Carolina. And even during the Obama presidency, there were midterm trips to South Carolina. So when people oversimplify these things, that we can make the mistake of miscalculating and misjudging what's actually going on. People calculate excitement. They may calculate excitement. On the flip side, you mentioned the young white Northeastern voter. I would say they might calculate excitement based on what the young minority kid on Instagram and TikTok may be looking at from a candidate, and they're not really looking at and they're dismissing a whole demographic, older African-American voters, a faithful voting bloc that's faithfully voting out in huge numbers, so much so that because they dropped to about 88% in 2016, it cost Hillary Clinton a huge opportunity. But David, I want to get your thoughts on this. I know that you have worked with the campaign. I remember we had discussions with your friends working on the Buttigieg campaign. Do you see an enthusiasm gap from your perspective that you would like to see change, or do you see that, like Jerry and Dr. Davis were mentioning, there's this tend to oversimplify the lack of enthusiasm that exists for former Vice President Biden?
Love the question. Number one, having worked in South Carolina and in Iowa for the caucuses and the primaries for a couple of cycles, what is killing everybody right now is there's no, like for Iowa in the caucuses, the beauty of the whole situation, although it's a bit chaotic, is a bunch of people go into a room and then different, candidates have supporters that stand on different, corners of the room. And as the evening progresses, you just start pulling people into your lines, right? That's what they call caucusing. Or in the primaries in South Carolina, like, for maybe a 6-month period, everybody's got to have a pretty steady groundswell game, there. But because South Carolinians recognize that national politics only matter every 4 years, you don't really necessarily know what kind of pot you're stirring when you drop into South Carolina all of a sudden and you just, try to pour money in. I'm trying to think of the billionaire Tom Steyer, for instance, spent like $1.3 billion in South Carolina, and that did absolutely nothing for him. I think he had a concert with Juvenile. It was complete pandering, right? And that was when we didn't have, everybody kind of trying to grapple with the pandemic. Like there was still some severance of, connectivity in terms of being able to actually, go out and speak to a candidate. South Carolina, Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, these places, you're going to be able to meet the presidential, candidate right there. And they're going to come into your house and start building some of those relationships. But seeing as the pandemic has kind of slowed all of that, those Super Tuesday states didn't benefit from the pandemic at all. And as we move into the convention now, like you said, there's going to be a digital convention. So again, I feel like it's a little too late, but this is where I say, again, it's not so much about the age of the candidate and their experience. There's no doubt that Joe Biden has 50 times as much experience and is much more qualified than 45 ever could have been, even after having served as president, right? Just from a common sense perspective. But those little touches that people make, the excitement that comes from having an AOC, being a part of your campaign, or all of the young individuals that I'm talking about that kind of have their own sections of the Democratic Party. You just don't see that with Joe Biden's campaign right now. And it's just leaving me wanting for more, particularly when there's not going to be that level of personal interaction. For whatever reason, our retail politics have carried us over the years and allowed us the opportunity to build a more genuine excitement when a candidate just pops up during GOTV in Florida or Michigan or Pennsylvania, and all of a sudden you're knocking the door and you look over your shoulder and there's Joe Biden. That's not going to happen this year. So, you know, the reality is that we've got to find a way to counter all of the big money spending in the ads, because he's not raising enough money and he's not going to have those personal interactions. I mean, I still strongly believe that we are going to, you know, win in November, but the mechanisms that are in place, barring the stupid actions of the current president, would not lead me to believe that we're in, you know, strong footing right now.
Right. And as you were talking, I was remembering a point that I made during the primary, which is like, people pressed me, why aren't you supporting Bernie Sanders? I told them personally, I resonate a lot with Bernie Sanders' agenda. But my point, my problem with Sanders and the more liberal candidates like Warren was that I was also concerned about the down ballot effect. What would this candidacy do for the Senate races? What would it do for Jamie Harrison in South Carolina? What would it do for Doug Jones in Alabama? What would it do for Mark Kelly in Arizona, for John Hickenlooper in Colorado? Camille, if you could you shed some light as to whether or not you think a Biden candidacy could help or hurt the down ballot effect in Senate and congressional races?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I would say that I just had a couple comments about what we were kind of saying before. In terms of like the enthusiasm gap, I don't know if we are actually looking towards November, if we're looking for the candidate who excites us. I think we are kind of past that point. I think I want to kind of double back to what we were saying before, which is that I think people are yearning for some normalcy. People are yearning for stability, for security. So as far as like who excites us, I don't know if that is a determining factor in the decisions that people are going to be making the next 100 days. With that being said, I think that does give some fuel towards the many other races that are happening in November. Yeah, there have been upsets definitely in terms of Senate races and some Senate primaries, as well as Democratic ones. One I think that I was following more closely was that of Representative Engel, who is for Foreign Affairs Committee. You know, a veteran being upset by an incumbent, a young Black man first to represent his district in that capacity, raised by a single mother, that is excitement. Those are not the things that we're talking about when it comes to November. November is who can we put there that is more exciting and less, because, you know, to kind of look at it on the other side, I don't know if people are voting for, or if people would be voting to put our current president back into the White House because he excites them. I think that people who are voting for the Trump administration or for Trump himself, you know, are voting with that economic interest in mind, for that representational kind of vote in mind. There's just kind of different metrics, I think, that we have now than there were before. So with that being said, it's going to take a lot of creativity from the Biden team to really show us a full ticket that excites people. A ticket we know is going to be a woman. We know that it's going to be a person of color. So with that choice in mind, I am really excited to see who is going to kind of bring some fresh fuel into, you know, a Biden presidency, which he has already publicly stated will be a one-term deal. So that in itself tells me that whoever that VP pick is going to be, we're technically setting up the administration to live after 2020, after this next presidency. So, yeah, and there's also another point that I kind of wanted to go to is that I think one reason why we should stop focusing on enthusiasm and really kind of dig into the competency piece, because enthusiasm, it's like, who gets you excited? It depends on a lot of different things. What gets me excited as a Black woman is totally different from what gets this 28-year-old in New Hampshire excited about whatever you will. We are the conscience when it comes to voting because Black women did not vote for this current administration. So one thing that I think we really do need to do is dig into our current president being the cause of the issues. I think that there's a narrative on the other side where we can just kind of view him as it's easier. He is more palatable. He in himself, he is more, he's more easily digestible when we can look at him as someone who is rolling with all these punches and he's receiving all this criticism, and he's just dealing with all of these different things and trying to be the most resilient he can be for us, for the United States. We really need to pin him as the root cause of issues. The African ban, the Muslim ban, we need to show him as the person who is starting, these things. In a pandemic, this is a president who wanted to strip healthcare benefits away from transgender Americans. The same president who also wanted to, effectively remove international students from their campuses at a very vulnerable time. So this is someone who is not shying away from preying on vulnerable communities in the midst of unprecedented global crisis. And I think what we need to do is really look at, dig into that competency issue and show the root cause of a lot of these issues. Because if not, going toe for toe about who gets us excited, or, where, that kind of, I think, argument is just totally different. So I'm seeing a lot of movement at the on the House side in particular, to uproot Mitch McConnell. Charles Booker was not successful in his primary, but that is someone with real stories who was friends with Breonna Taylor's family. That family is his family. Like, we are really, I think, at the state, at the local level, and when it comes to our congressional representatives, not only learning, some of us learning what our representatives actually do, learning for the first time who is on council, because those are the people who are deciding what happens with mask or no mask or opening, reopening, actually learning the names of our governors. But we are also seeing, I think, in some more progressive areas, candidates who are actually exciting and who are enthusiastic and who are people that we can get actually excited about, not who ones we have to kind of feign excitement for and kind of to push things along or to make us feel better or, to quell an issue. No, I'm genuinely excited about them. Andrew Yang, people were genuinely excited about universal basic income. They were. More people know about the idea. And you know what makes his ideas less kind of left and crazy? A global pandemic in which people actually did receive universal basic income, even if just one installment, hopefully a second installment, in terms of a GOP response to HEROES Act. But these ideas seem less crazy when crazy things are actually happening outside. And so that, I think, not from the presidency affects down ballot. I think Corona affects the down ballot. I think massive unemployment looks at the down ballot. We know what we're doing in November. Mm-hmm. Black people know what they're doing. There is some, I'm not even looking at the distractions of, an artist who maybe could get 2%. I'm not distracted. I know what I'm doing in November. What we need to be doing is picking a VP, kind of looking, as you're saying, Mike, down the ballot to see, wow, I'm really excited about my council person for the first time. I'm really excited about my, let's put a Black woman. Her name is I'm forgetting her name right now. Pat Timmons, I think. Black women with experience, young people with ideas. Like, those are exciting things to kind of get behind. So.
Yeah, and one of the things that you had emphasized, Camille, that I appreciated was the fact that it reminds me of the old adage, all politics is local. Meaning, as you had mentioned, Camille, that what excites me in North Carolina may not excite somebody in the Northeast, in New York, or in California. And so when we're looking at these elections and we're considering excitement and enthusiasm, it's important to put into perspective geopolitics. For for instance, you had mentioned the upset in New York, the primary that took place, the congressional upset. Would the candidate that had won the Democratic primary been as successful in a conservative rural community such as where I am, and running against someone that's more of a mainstream, middle of the road Democrat? So when we're looking at candidates and we're looking at, who would get this kind of enthusiasm from this demographic and who would get this enthusiasm from this, it's important to put in perspective, the region in which that candidate is running. Dr. Davis, I want to go back to you a little bit, knowing that, you're from a traditionally Republican state, Indiana. And there seems, as you had mentioned with the Lincoln Project, there seems to be a break within the current GOP in terms of, you've got the John McCain wing of the party, basically. And you have the Trump wing of the party. And there seems to be more of a spectrum, at least for me. Folks may disagree, but I believe that there's more of a wide array of spectrum within the Republican Party, within the Democratic Party. People would argue you've got AOC and Joe Biden, but I think there's more separating folks who are, traditionally Republicans, like Jack Kemp style Republicans, John McCain style Republicans, George W. Bush style Republicans, and Michelle Bachmann style Republicans, Trump Republicans, Ted Cruz Republicans. So with that in mind, do you see in your state a kind of separation or kind of division within the party, the Republican Party? And do you see there being less unification on the GOP side this November because of that?
I think this, in 2008, President Obama won the state of Indiana, which was totally unusual. In 2012, just 4 years later, we had Senator Joe Donnelly that won, and he won with the help of Democrats, and he won with the help of Senator Lugar, Republicans, because many of the Republicans had turned on Lugar, and they didn't like the way he was treated. I think and I hope this because I'm one of them, and that is the down ballot candidates are going to shape this in another way too, because of the fact that in this year and over the years, we have realized it's not just winning the state, winning the president of the United States. We have to win the governor races. We have to win the Senate. To win the presidency without having the House or without having the Senate makes your president have to work without having their arms tied behind their back kind of deal. We can see in Florida what the governor is doing there and how he's handling the coronavirus. We can contrast that to New York and how Governor Cuomo did that. So we see what's the importance of governor races. We see the importance of Senate races. We see the importance of Secretary of States or Attorney General. As we look at what's going on out in Portland, Oregon, how the Attorney General there is suing the government for how they are being dealt with in Portland. So we are looking at the importance of the local race. We must remember in 1965 in Selma on March 7, when they were trying to register and vote and everything else down there in 1965, that was not doing a presidential election. 64 was the election, the next one was coming in 68. The local elections were important. And that movement was done on a year that it wasn't even a national election when we had that greatest moment when it came down to the 65. And so local elections matter because of the school boards, the city councils, the commissioners, the county councils. We impact your life almost just as much, if not more, than the national government. And so when the national government is not working right, it really takes on a whole nother level for the local government to move forward. And so that's the key to me, is that the local government can and will play a major difference. I will say this, when it comes down to 2016, Democrats did a good job in most of this country, except in Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and a few other states. That's key to look at, because now we can go back to say, where did we go wrong in 2016? Well, we're up in Wisconsin, we're up in Michigan, we're up in Pennsylvania, we're doing well in Ohio, we have a good chance in North Carolina. Looks like we may even compete or win Florida. Texas, right now, we are ahead by 1 point in Texas. and Arizona is in play. That's 8 states right there, and I can't even rule out Georgia. And so therefore, when you put those kind of situations in and you put that into the equation, we are ahead. And a lot of times people say, I don't want to say that because Trump has got out all of his situations and everything else. When you look at those states, because the election comes down to about 7 to 10 states, really. I mean, we know where about 40 states are going to go, but 7 to 10 states really shape how this country is going to go with the November election. And so therefore, right now, it looks good for us. And so we just got to keep that momentum and really just keep sharing what we can do. And on the local level and on the national level, I think we're going to have a blue day on November. Looking forward to wearing blue that day.
All right. Thank you so much, sir. Jerry, I'm curious to get your take on the potential down ballot effect. I know personally, looking at states like Alabama, I remember in 2017, there was a huge cloud surrounding Roy Moore. Roy Moore, it was as if, after one story with another allegation kind of died down, another one would come up. And it just seemed as if no matter how hard he tried, allegations and controversy swallowed up his candidacy, and resulting in what I know I didn't expect to see, a Democratic senator from the state of Alabama. And I know that based on my volunteer work with the Democratic Party in Alabama, Madison County, Alabama, I know that was they weren't expecting that either. I'll just put it like that. Do you see a potential positive down ballot effect, as Dr. Davis had pointed out, for the Democrats on Senate elections, looking at, like I pointed out, Alabama, looking at Arizona, which now, as Dr. Davis pointed out, was also now a state that's in play. Do you see that?
Yeah, I think the best example that I can look at is really 2018. And, speaking, here in Texas, Beto ran an amazing campaign in 2018 for the Senate race. And what we saw was that we have these large suburban districts that usually vote Republican, that are very moderate. They don't really like Ted Cruz. They don't like Donald Trump. And you talked about that difference between the Republicans. They're more on the the moderate side. And, if you present a candidate that makes them comfortable enough to vote for a Democrat, then they will do it. So in 2018, we had, George W. Bush's dad, we call him Daddy Bush, his district in West Houston is now, as a Democrat. It's a Democrat district now because a lot of suburban Republicans end up voting for the Democrat. So I think what Joe Biden presents is an opportunity for a lot of the never Trumpers or the moderate, middle of the road Republicans to say, you know what, I really believe in this idea of conservative principles. I really believe in limited government. I grew up as a Republican, but Joe Biden is closer to me than Donald Trump is. And I'm comfortable enough to vote for him without feel like I am, getting rid of my values. Like I'm still, conservative. Like I'm still John Kasich, supporting, Joe Biden. So I think you could see the possibility of a major wave. Hopefully, Democrats take back the Senate. You can hold on some of these House races because I think Joe Biden is one of those candidates, and it's really one of the reasons why we saw after South Carolina that a lot of Democrats was like, "Hey, we got to drop out this race," because they felt like Joe Biden was that guy who could bring over these, these moderate Republicans. And so I think if he continue to run the type of campaign that he's running now, he does well with his vice president pick, who I'm hoping to put it out there as a Howard student. It'll be great to have an alumni base where you can say you have a Supreme Court justice and a vice president. So I'm behind Kamala. I think that she'll be great, but it just really depends on what happens. I really think that it could be a big wave of new Democrats led by the suburban America.
Thank you, man. And I see a question. It basically touched on what we had mentioned before in terms of the gutting of the Voting Rights Act. Should we be in an organizational mode now? I don't see any concerted efforts from our Black organizations to devise plans to inform/instruct our community to address the voting challenges that can potentially thwart a blue win. I know we had mentioned, there has to be an awareness, first of all, and then there has to be intentional efforts from our leaders and from those like us, community leaders, and those who may not have a specific official title, but who have knowledge about the kinds of laws that are in place in the state and on the municipal level to inform our our neighbors, our friends, our community members of the challenges that await them in just being able to register and cast a vote on November 3rd or before November 3rd if they want to vote early. I want to just go ahead and take each of your thoughts real quick on whether or not do you think we should be in organizational mode, and if so, how can we do that, Dr. Davis? Oh, you're on mute, sir.
I could not hear the last part of your question.
Oh, should we be in organizational mode, and if so,
no,
how?
I said I could not hear the last part of your question.
Okay, so our community. Okay, so she doesn't see
the organizational mode.
Yeah, should we be in organizational mode in terms of informing the community, and how can we do that?
I can't hear.
I'm sorry, sir.
Your thing came in and out.
Mike,
I'm sorry.
Mike, I can go ahead and answer.
Go ahead, Camille.
I could hear it.
Yes, the answer is yes. We should definitely be in organizational mode. I think that one thing that was said kind of earlier in the discussion, I think we were talking just about kind of the different coalitions that support either side. And I think, again, coronavirus is not a blessing. It's not anything that I think we should. I say this because I've been seeing a lot of comments that kind of allude to coronavirus being this eye opener. Yes and no. I think that if anything, it is driving people to understand who represents them and who makes these decisions. Who makes a city ordinance that says, what it is that's going to happen after August? Who are the people who, who are police chiefs, who are judges, who are DAs? People are becoming, I think, more aware of that. So that in itself, I think, is intensifying people's desire to understand who represents them, to just kind of know who basically is on their roster. So I think and I hope that is something that is, reminding people of their agency, reminding them of when it is time to vote and get things together. I think at a party level, we are having to work together to put together CARES Act and HEROES Act and these $1 trillion relief bills and these stimulus packages. They have to be put forward bipartisanly. There's not one group that can decide or cannot decide, what will happen ultimately for the American people. So we should most definitely be in organizational mode. I think, unfortunately, the tragedy that is happening all across the world, but especially here in the United States, is getting people to understand a little bit more about who represents them. But on the other side of that, it's organized for which purpose? Because as George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and these other martyrs lost their lives for the world to see, the message was clear from my standpoint of what people wanted to see, and that was abolish the police. That was very, abolish the police, defund the police meant defund the police, not reform. So people are becoming aware, they are becoming more organized. And I think that with that being said, we talk a lot about people not being engaged or not being interested. So if more people are interested and they know exactly what it is that they're looking for, it's going to take really skilled politicians to be able to give everyone a bit of what it is that they want to see. To really have kind of discussions that are bringing in a lot more different options. So people are being organized. I think people are coming together, and people are kind of making up their minds as far as what it is that they want. But will you listen to them? That's the twofer for me. Organize around what type of cause. And once I am organized and I am educated and I do know how to use all the civic engagement levers, you still aren't going to listen to me? Right. That in itself, I think, could create a situation that we are not prepared for. And I think we talk a lot about, you know, what the Republican Party has become, what the Democratic Party has become, all these kind of exogenous things coming in and putting pressure on what it is that we have right now. Things need to change. Plans need to evolve. We need to see some really creative things happening. So yeah, that's the answer to my question. And I'll hand it back to Dr. Davis.
And before we head back to Dr. Davis, and because we're, you know, time is running away from us, I wanted to also tie in this question with the legacy of John Lewis. Like, how can this be tied into honoring the legacy of John Lewis? John Lewis, of course, was a congressman elected in 1986, elected from the state of Georgia. He served in that capacity for over 30 years. This was his 34th year, I believe, in office. He was someone who was a key player in the civil rights movement. In fact, he was alongside Dr. Martin Luther King, and was one of the speakers on the March on Washington that Dr. King famously gave his "I Have a Dream" speech at. And so, that being said, how can we, Dr. Davis, in light of, you know, this question about should we be organizing, should we be informing our neighbors, how can we, by doing that, honor the legacy of John Lewis?
We can be a committee of one and go vote. Mm-hmm. And that's just the way it is when we look at honoring Congressman Lewis and Reverend C.T. Vivian, mm-hmm. all of those, and the unnamed people who were on the bridge, all of those who came to fight, because there were over 600 people there. As a native of Alabama and now living in Indiana, we see how that movement not only changed the state of Alabama, but it changed the country. And now they have taken their rest, and it's time for us to take that baton and make sure that we take it home and we get to that finish line as fast as we can on November the 3rd. We vote for the president, we vote for our governors, we vote for all the way down to who's going to take care of our dog. We vote for everybody on that ballot. We vote for school boards, and we do that in the name of those who have fought, because where blood has been shed, life is easier. Mm-hmm. But life only gets easier when we take up the baton. We can't continue to only celebrate them in the past and not do our duty now in 2020. If we don't do our duty now, we will not only hurt ourselves now, but we will be a disgrace to their legacy. And we cannot afford to do that. We must run the race even faster than what they ran in 1965. Each generation has to pick up that baton and run even faster and stronger, because the challenges of today are even more challenging. So we have to run at a faster pace and run together. And if the person doesn't run next to me, I'm still going to run. And I'm going to run, and I'm going to make sure I vote, make sure my family votes, make sure my friends vote, make sure everybody can vote. That's the way we honor those men and women who make sure that we could run for office and vote. May they rest in peace, rest in power, and may we vote on November 3.
Exactly. Thank you, sir. And I also want to emphasize, that Congressman Lewis literally gave blood for this cause. The central theme of his public service was broadening the access of the electorate, broadening the access of the vote, making sure that those who went down to the grave, those who were martyrs to the cause, did not die in vain. He fought to ensure that people can exercise their right to vote. And so, David, with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and let you have the floor, if you're there. If not, Jerry, jump right in.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's a clear way to honor John Lewis. I mean, if you listen to any of his public speeches the last 3 years, I know that he was at Texas Southern for a couple of years ago, University, campaigning for Hillary, and I had the pleasure to run into him last fall at the CBC. And every time you run into him, he gives a speech. He telling people, he gave blood, at Selma, but he's not asking us to give blood. He just asks us to go and vote. So I think the way that we can honor him individually this fall is, not just for us to vote, but to make sure that we are reaching out to our family members, to our friends, and you literally dragging people to the polls and making sure that they are getting there to vote. And then I think another thing they can do is, name, I think Kamala or some other senators have, the House of Representatives have a bill to name a new Voter Rights Act after John Lewis. So I think that's a great way to honor him also.
Okay, thank you, man. Thank you so much. David, are you there? Go ahead, sir.
Sorry about that, team.
Oh, that's fine.
Again, I think that the focus of our party should be, and the focus of the upcoming election should be, about building a bench. And I think that does extend to local municipalities all the way up to gubernatorial races. Without giving away too much game, you need a certain amount of money, right, for each level of an election that you get into. If the DNC and the DCCC and the DSCC actually work to help raise money on behalf of candidates so that there was a way that they could meet those goals as opposed to requiring them to have that money on the front end, we might have the kind of representation and excitement within the party that we are lacking severely. That's it. That's what I got.
Thank you. And lastly, as we're coming to a close, I was just impressed to ask this question to you guys as we're wrapping up. There's a lot of folks, I personally have had folks try to engage me in the Facebook debate or conversation about why the Democratic Party seems to be taking the African-American vote for granted. Should African-Americans be open to supporting the Republican Party? Because, and then they bring up the fact that the GOP historically did fight for the African American demographic to get the right to vote. They were fighting for their right to be no longer enslaved during the Reconstruction era. Should African Americans be more open to support the Republican Party? Camille.
Thank you for that. Just really quick, I know Black Republicans, so I think that it is almost an assaulting misnomer to say, should we be considering supporting the Republican Party? I think that question comes from, I think people are really asking, because they are dissatisfied with what, the Democratic Party is presently, they're, kind of thinking about, whether they should, I guess, on paper become Republican, like switch parties. And that to me, I think is a deeply personal choice. As a fellow of the Congressional Black Caucus, that is a bipartisan, bicameral caucus of individuals that are African American themselves, but do not just represent African American districts. So, I think it's an interesting kind of question. Now, if we're talking about, I think people use that kind of as a taunt because Republican or Democratic policy kind of aside, like we kind of all have a choice in who it is we will actually support. Registered Republicans can support whoever they'd like to, as well as Democrats. So I'm not of the mind that we need to be particularly prescriptive in or hold allegiance to a specific party itself. I think, irregardless of what the election is, you're voting for a candidate. Folks who are coming into the process maybe with not as much information, they might do that down ballot sort of thing, and you are probably more likely to just research the candidates who are of the same party. But, I think, yeah, if that's something that you're considering, consider it. Black people can be whatever it is that they want to be. I think that we should be kind of past that. And I think the largest cohort of folks who will to be voting for the first time, Gen Z, they they are kind of a group who's kind of open, I think, to ideas and not so much party allegiance. So that would just kind of be my answer. And yes, to talk about the legacy of John Lewis and the legacy also of Representative Cummings, titans and individuals who were literally angels on earth and died in office, dedicating their lives to fighting for justice. And I think that sort of valor and that sort of self-sacrifice is so important that we use that as fuel to get the next generation excited. So
thank you, Camille. Thank you. Jerry?
Well, I think that's a really good question. And I think that when people see 85 to maybe 90% African Americans vote Democratic, you were wrong to assume that means that there's 90% African Americans are liberal, right? Mm-hmm. You have a large base, and I'll actually argue almost close to 45, maybe a majority, that are very conservative, socially conservative. And a lot of them believe in limited government. They believe in, they believe in capitalism. They just believe the government role to play is part of the curb the abuses of capitalism. And, they still vote Democratic. And one of the reasons that there's this big tension in the Democratic Party is because you have a large segment of moderate conservative Democrats. But I think these conservative Black Democrats have said, well, I'm going to vote Democratic because even though I agree with conservative principles, even though that I might agree with the teaching of Milton Friedman or Roger Nozick or Ayn Rand, I feel like the Republicans are just so wrong on the social issues. They're tying themselves up with too many racist individuals that I can't bring myself to support them. So even though I believe in conservative principles, I have a fundamental agreement with limited government. I have a place in the Democratic Party. So the question I would have for people asking that question, knowing that there's a large segment of the Democratic Party that are conservative, what is your reason for voting Republican at this point? Because you can't say it's philosophical because you have a large segment of Democrats who are in agreement with you. So what is your reason at this point to support a guy like Donald Trump, who is a white supremacist? So that's my question.
Thanks, Jerry. David? Oh, you're on mute.
I agree with Jerry wholeheartedly. At this point, it's not just about ideals. It's about who are the players right now, and who can I go to sleep knowing that I'm aligning myself with on a grander scale. I completely respect Camille being a Republican, have tons of Republican friends, and I consider myself to be a moderate, period. But there are just too many senators, majority leaders or minority leaders, like people who are in, positions to control the political landscape and, of course, the socioeconomic landscape at this point that it just doesn't make any sense for me to align myself with them. And I can't imagine a situation in which I get to a place where my income forces me to be more aligned with those individuals. So it's just, from a socioeconomic standpoint, how I was raised, right now the Democratic Party seems to do it for me. But to be honest, it's up for grabs. And like Camille said, these Gen X kids, they have a lot of choices to make in front of them. And it's going to be on an individual basis. Every single election should be on an individual basis, regardless of whichever party you decide to affiliate yourself with. So the party politics don't really matter to me. I just happen to be a Democrat because I despise some Republicans.
Thank you, David. Dr. Davis.
I live in a primarily red state. in a primarily blue county, where my district is about 55% blue, about 45% red. And so therefore, a good Democrat has to be able to listen to what's going on in the Republicans, and a good Republican should listen to what's going on in the Democrats. I think when people say, well, the Democratic Party is not taking care of African Americans, my position is, what are you doing to help them to take care of African Americans? And that's the issue. If you're a Republican, what are you doing to help them in your party? What are you doing to help people further the beliefs that you have? That's it. I have chosen, based on the beliefs that I have, to be a Democrat. Does that mean that everything in the Democrat Party is always great? No. Does that mean I cannot reach out to the Republicans to get help? No. I have reached out several times to the Republican Party to get help. Republicans have reached out to me. And so therefore, and people have told me this year, hey, I'm a Republican, I'm going to vote for Trump, but I'm voting for you for commissioner. Okay? And so therefore, when it comes down to these issues, is the candidate right now is me. Okay? Yes, Democrat, but really the D is Davis. And that's where I have to focus on myself right now. I'm Davis, and I have to be able to go to the homes of Republicans and Democrats, blacks, whites, Hispanics, those who love God, those who don't love God, those who worship Sunday, Saturday, Monday, Tuesday, don't worship at all, those who just needs the trash taken out. Okay? Right. That's what I have to be able to go to and listen to that kind of a person, hear their issues, and then move forward. That's the key. What am I doing to make my own house better? And if I can do that, then I'm not too much worried about everybody else right now.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to add to the discussion. My advice for anyone considering, who wants to be independent, be an independent thinker, and not want to go with the masses and go ahead and with the majority of African Americans at this moment in history that seems to be going with the Democratic Party. My advice to them is think critically. Look at, like Dr. Davis said, what is, and David, think about your interests. Think about the interests of not just yourself, but those like you, those in your community, those who have the same kind of skin hue as you. And take into consideration the historical perspective behind the argument African Americans were behind the abolitionist movement. Was that Republican Party the same party we're seeing today? Was the Democratic Party back then the same party we're seeing today? Look at the legislative records. The Democratic Party has given us Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. They've given us NPR radio. They've given us PBS. They've given us food stamps. They've given us Head Start, the Affordable Care Act. They've given us the DACA program. And people think that the DACA program is just primarily helping folks at the southern border. No, you've got African folks that look like you and me from Haiti, from the Caribbean, from the United Kingdom, who benefit from programs like DACA. So consider these things. Think critically. Don't take a position just because it's the road less traveled by. Actually critique why you're taking this position before you do. Look at the legislative records, look at the history, and then make a determination. But thank you so much. It's been an amazing panel. I've had an amazing discussion with you, Dr. Davis, Camille, David, Jerry. I had an amazing time discussing politics with you guys. And I just want to thank you each for taking time out of your evenings to come and speak with me over this this platform. It means so much to me. And anytime you would like to be back on, I would love to have you back on. It's been a great night. With that being said, I want to encourage those who are viewing.
Yeah, thank you, Mike.
Thank you all. Thank you all. And I want to encourage those viewing to think.
And to the fabulous panel.
and to take this seriously as we're getting close to election day. We're getting closer, less than 100 days. And it's important that we think critically. It's important that we no longer think that the adults will make the decision that's more rational. We're now in the position to make these decisions. Let's think logically, rationally, maturely, and make a decision accordingly. With that being said, the Political Mic is a show where you have the mic. So I'm looking forward to anyone who's interested in being a part of this discussion. Inbox me, DM me, and we can set it up and make it happen. With that being said, I want to thank you all for being a part of this program this evening. Thank you. And with that being said, we're going to sign off.
Good night.